And excited to have with me Joe Bartulis, who is works at Fletcher Tilton and is the chair of the Labor and Employment Practice Group.
That's correct. Thank you so much, Tim, for having me
No,
today.
Joe, great to have you. And probably when we were in law school, and as we said before we started, I'm a recovering lawyer who practiced for 12 years before I got into politics and now at the chamber. But some of the things you'd never think you'd be involved with. But I'm sure when you were in law school, you never thought that you would be advising employers about the issues relating to marijuana.
That's correct. You're right.
And we've seen just over the last 4 or 5 years, in 2012, a ballot question in Massachusetts about medical marijuana, and then most recently in 2016, recreational marijuana, legalizing it. And there's an impact on employers there, correct?
There is, yes.
And if you've got employers now saying we have drug and alcohol policies in place, people come to work impaired, where does an employer start in trying to deal with this ballot question?
Well, what's happened is, in light of the ballot question in the recreational law, which went into effect in mid-December, the question becomes what type of testing can they do? Can they discipline or discharge employees for having tested positive for marijuana and the like? So I field those kind of questions all the time. I think what is very helpful, and I've done articles on this, and people are always welcome to call me at Fletcher Tilton or to email me, but the question becomes, what can we or can we not do now in light of the new law? So one of the questions that first comes up is, now that a person is able to use marijuana recreationally, can I prohibit them from using or coming to work possessing any small amount of recreational marijuana? And the answer, of course, is yes. That has always been the law. That continues to be allowed. The second question that will often come up is people will pose the question of, can I discipline or discharge somebody who's under the influence or comes to work under the influence of marijuana now that it's allowed recreationally? And the answer to that has always been and continues to be yes. The recreational marijuana law is codified in MGL Chapter 94G.
So for non-lawyers, MGL would be Mass General Laws.
General Laws, thank you. So under Section 2E, under the law, there's an express carve-out that expressly entitles employers to promulgate employer policies that speak to marijuana use and continue to prohibit employees from using marijuana in the workplace or possessing it in the workplace. That law continues to allow that. Interestingly, too, the federal law, marijuana is prohibited under federal law, so any employers who are following federal mandates, working under federal grants, a federal contractor, the marijuana laws, federal law still prohibits the use of marijuana.
And Joe, that's a great point, and I think it's important for our viewers and for employers to kind of understand that even though here in Massachusetts both the medical marijuana was passed and now the recreational use, the federal government still takes a very different view on this.
That's correct. It is still prohibited under federal law.
And so there's always this concern, whether it be the Obama administration or now the Trump administration, that at some point, the U.S. Attorney General, could come in and say, federal law enforcement agency can say, we're going to take a more proactive stance in enforcing federal law.
You bet, absolutely. So then within that context, folks will often say, so can I continue to test? What are the laws on testing? And so what I've tried to enlighten people on, or to walk people through, is kind of the lay of the land, or what the landscape looks like as far as testing goes. In Massachusetts, we have what's known as the right to privacy under the statutes. Under those statutes, it's a balancing of interest test between the employer's right to know and to have a drug-free workplace with an employee's right to, do what he or she wishes on his or her own time without the government intruding into his or her privacy. So what I've done is I walk people through frequently drug testing kind of from 3 angles. And the first angle would be what I call pre-employment testing. And that would be in the, before somebody comes to work for an employer. The second one would be reasonable suspicion testing, where somebody is showing indicia at the workplace about what they would, that would cause the employer to have some suspicion about that. And then a third one might be what we would call random drug testing. And when one balances all of those interests, there are certain protocols that one would want to follow depending on the nature of the drug testing that takes place. So what I advise folks, what I advise folks is in the pre-employment testing arena, many employers will test for both alcohol and all types of drugs. The question becomes, can we still test for marijuana? And the answer is yes. The interesting dynamic which begets all of these questions is that marijuana can remain in one's system long after its impairing impacts have long since passed. So you get a positive drug test for marijuana even though it's really not impairing someone's ability to do it. That's really kind of where the rubber meets the road on this. So in the pre-employment context, you can test if you do a number of things, and the first thing you would need to do, and this applied even before this law went into effect, is that you would notify the employee in the job posting or prospective employee that this job requires us to conduct a pre-employment drug test. The second thing you would do is you would only do the drug test after a conditional offer of employment has been made. And then the next thing one would want to kind of keep in mind is that all people for whom you are drug testing, every one of them for a position, all of them should be tested. So if you have a forklift operator and you're posting for a forklift operator position, every one of the candidates to whom you've offered a conditional offer, every one of them should be tested if you're saying it's a testing requirement. What employers don't usually do, but I caution them against it anyway, would be where they say, so-and-so looks to me like they wouldn't be a user of drugs, so I'm not going to spend the money to do a drug test. And you just, you want to test all or none of the people for a position.
And you just gave a great analogy. You know, why is this important in the workplace? I mean, workplace safety, you know, where there's lacks workplace safety, there's liabilities and exposures to companies. But all of this that we've been talking about poses more kind of responsibilities and burdens on businesses as these kind of laws change.
That's right. That's right.
And, you know, and I guess in that regard, you know, and I think your analogy was a good one in terms of, you know, an employer can make these conditions, you know, no more than they can walk in with a case of beer. They, you know, you can prohibit, you know, marijuana or drugs in the workplace. How would you advise an employer? I mean, if you're, you know, how would you advise them in terms of having policies in place?
Well, so first of all, I think one of the requirements or the prerequisites that all employers should do is to put people on notice of what's being done. So I've just walked you through the pre-employment context of putting people on notice. If you apply for this job and you get offered a position, you'll be drug tested. Similarly, for current employees, there should be detailed policies vis-a-vis A, prohibiting or what conduct is prohibited in the workplace, and similarly, to the extent that there will be drug testing or alcohol testing on current employees, whether it be random or reasonable suspicion, again, the best practice would be to have employees be on notice of those requirements in advance.
And you put them on notice through an employer handbook, postings, a variety of things?
So most employers will do it through an employee handbook where they're putting the people on notice of these things.
So a lot of employee handbooks are going to be getting updated because of this law. Or should be.
Well, many of them will. Now, many employers, at least my clients, I proactively make sure that they have detailed policies and handbooks on this. So in the case of most of my clients, it requires merely a minor modification. But the key takeaway really is before, when marijuana was illegal, let's assume that the employer had a policy prohibiting this conduct. Now that the law decriminalizes recreational use, many employers are revising their employee handbooks to put employees and prospective employees on notice that they may not be testing for marijuana any longer. So that's really where some of the modifications are coming in.
And so, Joe, if as an employer out there, somebody has questions, how do they get a hold of you? Clearly, you know this in great detail. If someone's looking to get more information or learn how they can better, you know, make sure that their workplace is up to compliance legally and doing things the right way, how do they get in touch with you?
So I'm at Fletcher Tilton. We're a general practice law firm with offices in Worcester, Framingham, Medfield, and Cape Cod in Centerville. We've got 45 plus attorneys. I happen to chair our labor and employment law practice group. And if they have any questions as it relates to labor and employment law questions, they can obviously call me. My number is 508-459-8214. I also have email, and my email would be the letter J followed by the spelling of my last name, Bartulis @FletcherTilton.com.
FletcherTilton.com. Well, we want to thank you for being with us. We want to thank Fletcher Tilton for being great members of the chamber and supporting us with our Bill Short Golf Tournament coming up July 17th at the Haven. And Joe, thank you. Timely discussion and very informative, and look forward to talking with you soon about issues in the workplace.
Thank you very much.
Thank you with us.